broadcasted. Firstly, before I start, this is all about covering what comes next in the financial side, while there's a tremendous amount of coverage on the epidemic or the pandemic, I think we call it now. These are all new words to me. I'm learning from a lot of people around this situation. If any of you have friends or loved ones or are affected yourself by this, then my heart is with you and my thoughts are with you, because this is truly a unique and extremely scary time that we live in today. At the same time, my job is to try and keep you up to date with the financial situation. So what we are doing right now is making unprecedented, never before seen, certainly not in my lifetime, decisions in order to overcome this health crisis. And my job is to try and navigate you through some of the consequences and what that actually means in your next approach. So some of you might be in a situation where you're not really ready to start listening to the financial side, but others of you might be in isolation or at home right now, and you are interested in this type of content. So just before I get started, as I said, literally the world has changed since we last broadcasted. That's how fast things are going right now. A few things that I've been doing, here where I am, people are starting to take this seriously, but they were really not taking it that seriously a few days back. And I'm still speaking to people that are not taking it seriously. I've been protective measures that I've been taking is not going out. We have reached a lockdown stage here, but it's still not the type of lockdown that we've seen in other regions like China and Italy. But I think these things are inevitably likely to happen in whatever region, because people are not really taking it as seriously as they should. So I'm going out with a mask whenever I do have to go out. I'm frequently washing my hands. I'm using the antiseptic gels, and also covering my eyes, ears, mouth, nose, with either glasses or a protective mask, and even wearing my hood when I'm going out there. So, one thing I've noticed is a lot of people aren't wearing masks just because they don't have masks. And it really dawned upon me, it's an obvious thing, but sometimes people need to tell you obvious things, that you don't necessarily need to have a mask when you could use a scarf or something like that. Again, I'm not the person to get health advice from. I'm just telling you things that I'm doing. I've been listening to other people to try and get my advice of how we do this. But my job is to, as I said, navigate you through some of the financial decisions so that you can have more information. My job is not to pile on more fear in a time of where some people might be experiencing, really high levels of anxiety, uncertainty, and fear. My job is to try and give you more information so that hopefully you can take that information and use it in order to decide what you will be doing with your financial affairs over the coming days, weeks, hours, months ahead. So let's jump straight in. This is the fourth broadcast like this, so I'm not going to be repeating previous content. If you start with the first broadcast that I gave, not the Sunday where Trump announced the measures that the US will be taking in terms of supporting people, in terms of financial decisions, in terms of monetary policy, in terms of fiscal policy. If you start there, we'll create a playlist and you can go deeper into the effects of some of those. I want to try and cover some of the things that have happened since then. And I know that the title of this video may seem very dramatical, if that's the correct way of saying it, but the reality is that we are in a global reset. I think for Mida, when we were speaking before this, she's going to be picking out your questions. So please do make sure you ask those questions on Twitter, on Facebook, on LinkedIn. I think Twitter is the main medium that we're using at the moment, but we'll be picking out some questions there. But it really is a Control Alt Command Alt Delete, whether you're a PC or Mac, with the opportunity to completely reinvent our financial system at the other side. So the reason I'd call it a global reset is because we are in a scenario today where I believe, my personal belief is that the government have no choice but to do what they are doing in terms of unlimited resources. We're not in a situation where we're bailing out banks. We're in a situation where we're bailing out people. And the reason that we're bailing out people this time is because this health crisis is fully global, fully complete interdependency upon how other countries act. And really, if we look at it, the opportunity for us to stop using finger pointing political moves, because those political moves, that one-upmanship, is only going to harm your country and your family at the end of it. So we're in a situation where these political moves has really should be completely channeled into what politicians and governments are going to do in a way where I think for one of the first time, we do have to be on the same team here. It's been a bit disturbing for me as somebody that's a part of the Bitcoin community to see, and I'm obviously open to ideas and different economic thoughts and different things. But it's been somewhat disturbing for me to see, like, maybe many people believe that this crisis might be created for some kind of, by a government in order to have some kind of crazy move or, psychopathic or, narcissistic behavior. But the reality is we have to take this crisis that we are in right now, and we do have to contain it. This health crisis does need to be contained. And the only way to contain it, the way that I see it, is for the government to actually put everything and chuck everything at it. And I don't see this as a time for debating libertarian ideals, because while temporarily we may be moving into a situation of, whether that be martial law, whether that be full government control, whether that be a world that looks more like communism in a world that has been, more in a capitalistic ideal. We have no choice at this stage, because I don't believe that there are libertarian solutions of how to keep everybody in a house. Because everybody acting for their own self-interest is not driving the kind of behavior that is going to help the world right now. And that is both an interesting opportunity, because we have literally shut down the economy, something that we've never experienced before. And we get to learn and see things that we will never ever experience in any other situation other than what we have today. So we have to question things that we've never questioned before, or we have questioned before, but we never actually thought could change. So, the ethics of financial and economic sanctions in environments like this, really need to be called into question when one country, for political reasons, is sanctioning another country in a time when the world needs to be collaborating in global information, global resources. Something that we can call into question today, like we would never have had the opportunity to question before. The fact that we, for one of the first times in modern history, we get to actually see and experience what it's like when the world isn't polluting on a scale that we actually would normally see under normal economic activity. And we get to experience and see what effect that might have on the world and on our environment. You would never have had an opportunity to see such things unless we had the situation that we're in today. For as long as I can remember, ever since I studied economics at university, approximately, I'm not sure of the time frame now, 2000. So, well, yeah, that's 20 years ago. 20 years ago since I started obsessing over this subject of finance and economics. I've never felt like the reforms that I thought would and have to happen in the world could ever be implemented in such a fast time frame, because there's so many things that would be impacted by such reforms. And it almost felt like a mission that's too impossible to achieve at many occasions, because of vested interest, because of the effects that it has on the level of normality that people have become used to in financial markets, because of the level of integration in our some of the systems that we rely upon, like our pension schemes, our insurance premiums, that all intertwine into the financial system. And monetary reform can produce such a change to some of those that there's inevitably going to be winners and losers and a redistribution of wealth. Yet, for one of the first times that I know of, and I'm sure other people have experienced things in times of war and times of other crisis, we get to experience some of the consequences that other countries we read about, we see about, that some of our political decisions are responsible for. But we never get to experience the level of fear and the level of uncertainty until today. And so we have this incredible opportunity to do a global reset. And by a global reset, after we get past this health crisis, and I have full faith in humans to innovate their way out of it. The fact that we are experiencing this in the time that we live in today, where we can do some of the things that we could never have done in the past. Children all around the world are going to school from home. That would never have been possible before. People like some of my friends outside of the Bitcoin community, she's giving her yoga classes that she can no longer do face to face, and people are tuning in and doing yoga globally together from their homes. Some of the incredible, amusing and disturbing videos that we've been receiving, that the world has put their creative energy towards producing, things to cheer people up, things to collaborate, things to continue business as usual. I'm sure that many people that have had to close their factories right now are thinking about how they can explore in these times when they're trying to keep their minds busy, how they can eventually invest in some of these technologies and robots that can run factories while you're in a remote location, and these things get 3D printed. It's like the amount of innovation that we've had over the decades feels like it's all led to this situation that we found ourselves in today, to be able to combine so many different things, so much creativity, and such a disruption to our usual lives. We are doing things this week that a few months ago we would never have dreamed we would be doing. Our habits, our habitual decisions that we have to make in the day-to-day of life are now actually, you have to do things differently this week, next week, and the months ahead, that you've actually got the time now to actually think about things that you would never have thought about because you didn't have the time. You were too busy doing the things that you were doing. We get to rethink our financial system, and it would be a crying shame if out of this health crisis and the inevitable financial crisis that we will experience as a result, and the financial markets crashes that we all are experiencing right now, where, you know, trillions of dollars is being created, trillions of currencies around the world are being created, and trillions is being knocked off financial markets, and the next day billions is being added to the financial markets as we ride out this time. It would be a crime to return to business as usual after that. It would be a crime to return to the level of indebtedness that our existing financial system has driven people into. And I understand that many people that come from a libertarian type of thought process right now may see this as their ultimate nightmare, where government have taken full control over our basic freedoms. And I understand and empathize with that. But the cold, hard reality is that I believe that situations like this is why governments were created, because this is where individual self-interest, you know, classical economics, you know, the invisible hand, I don't think was built for situations like we are experiencing today. And the cold, hard reality is that we do need to stay at home. And if people think that we don't need to do that, you know, you just need to watch some of the graphic things that are being shared at the moment right now. You know, sorry. I didn't mean to go that deep into some of these situations, but it really is a changing time in history. So let's go into some of the financial stuff.
You're right, Simon. Shall we do are you okay, Simon? Do you want to take a break? Do you want me to crack you up?
Yeah, go on. For me, there's always good
Okay, cool.
at doing that. I think I'm good now. I just needed to rethink. Okay, so Goldman Sachs actually made an announcement. They're forecasting a 24% decline in US GDP in the second quarter of 2020. To give context of a 24% decline in US GDP, you know, the highest GDP country in the world is US, and a 24% decline is 2.5 times bigger than any other time in human history. We have never seen a 2.5% greater decline than the largest decline in GDP that we've ever seen in human history. That is something that I don't think we're ever going to experience again, but that is where we are today. In order to stop the economy, governments are going to have to pay for potentially up to 80% of all workers in countries like the UK, based upon the policies that Boris Johnson has announced. You know, this is the businesses stopping and governments agreeing to pay up to 80% of their wages is just a significant stimulus that we haven't seen before. And it's 100% necessary. It's the only way that I think we can get through this. We've seen in Venezuela, 32 million people cannot access their bank accounts right now. Venezuela, a country that has been under economic sanctions because of political reasons, where the world is not allowed to transact with Venezuela, has also lost access to their bank accounts, which means that they can't access their funds in a time when the coronavirus is killing people. You know, this is really, really horrific for so many people. And I find myself, you know, getting worried about my situation because I'm in a hotel right now on a lovely island, and I can't necessarily, you know, for those of you that know or watch the previous videos, the timing of this was slightly unfortunate for me, where I was getting a lot of building work done in my house and I couldn't move into the house, and then the hotel might be closing. So I've had to try and, get some furniture together to move into a certain section of the house. But I can't even think about complaining about that situation, that I'm able to be on an island and under shelter, when you look at some of the situation of the people in Italy and Spain, and that don't have that. And this is time for us to be able to question these things. The Federal Reserve has essentially said that they will give completely unlimited capital in order to bail out the financial systems. The way that they're doing that is they're giving unlimited capital in order to buy corporate bonds. It's quantitative easing. So we're not just seeing the large normal bailouts that we saw during the last financial crisis, which essentially redistributes money into the traditional financial system, because stocks and bonds were crashing at the same time. That does not happen. That is very unusual. At the same time, say stores of values like gold were as well. And we saw the reaction of Bitcoin. We'll get to Bitcoin when we do some of our questions, because it's been very interesting to see Bitcoin's reaction to this scenario. But the Fed has said that they're essentially giving unlimited resources. The difference between this and the last financial crisis is that all the money went to rich people and banks. This time there's different stimulus packages. It's making its way to all different types of people that are losing their jobs, people that can't work, but there are people that are not receiving that money as well. And governments all around the world are trying to figure out, under massive pressures, how to actually get those funds that are going to be needed in these times. This is certainly, this is more than anything we saw during the last financial crisis. And for those of you that watched some of my previous videos where I've talked about the Ponzi scheme called fiat currency, and the fact that it drives individuals, corporations, and governments deeper into debt, until eventually you reach the phase where we are today, where you have more debt than money that exists, more debt than productivity, more debt than money. And the effect that has on inflation and interest rates and our economy and all the normality that we experience. This is so much more than the previous financial crisis. This has been more stimulated, more bailouts for different types of institutions, organizations. This is more than we've ever experienced. And so there's a phrase, there's a school of thought that in situations like this you get creative destruction, whereby the most inefficient things can disappear, and you shouldn't necessarily bail out those inefficiencies. But there are really important things. There are market failures. Even in the most classical economics, it recognizes market failures that government need to intervene in. And although many people might say that we're moving towards that world that people fear so much, of complete government control, my hope is that that's a temporary measure that we need to use in order to get ourselves out of these scenarios. And we have the most amazing opportunity to rebuild those systems from scratch. And actually think about, if we were to create money, design money from scratch today, would we ever have come up with a system whereby the government has this quasi-private national institution called the Federal Reserve, or the Central Bank, or the Bank of England, or the People's Bank of China, that manipulates the level of indebtedness through pushing up and down interest rates in order to encourage people to go to debt, so that they can end up pushing up certain asset classes that then reach a level of stage where no one can afford to buy their property and real estate, simply because the banks are allocating 40% of all the digital currency that the government has outsourced to the private banking sector, where essentially you need to push and stimulate the economy and then send the people that solve the economy by taking on the debt bankrupt, by pushing up interest rates in a Ponzi scheme that means money can never be created unless debt is created. Nobody would have invented or come up with that system. But we found ourselves with that system over decades and decades of, I either call it a conspiracy theory where these bogeymen in the sky that control the world came up with this ingenious plan of how to get the entire world into debt. And I'm not ridiculing that. There may be truths over time where special interests and groups have pushed and lobbied our financial system in certain directions, which completely benefit certain interest groups. Or maybe we just found ourselves here over time, where one financial crisis after another meant that we had to reinvent and innovate. And we found ourselves in this system that nobody would ever have dreamed up of how to create money. And yet in 2008, Satoshi Nakamoto came up with a version of money that probably he, she, they never dreamed could succeed. And yet it's given people the opportunity to be able to transact, to own their own money, to spend their own money. And one of the most amazing communities of people looking at these subjects, when before Bitcoin was created, when I used to discuss money, nobody was interested in this subject. In fact, most of the time it was a disbelief. When we found the Bitcoin community, it was the first community, and the reason it's so dear to my heart, that actually cared about money, that actually questioned money, that actually found something that gave people a glimmer of hope that sound money could exist, that there is something that has a fixed money supply. But we have to appreciate that while a fixed money supply creates amazing things for people's savings that are in a position to be able to save for the long term and are able to take such risks and speculations, we still need money that does different things. We still need fiat money. We still need money that you may not want to use for your savings, but allows people to transact at a more stable level. That can be innovated. We had that with stable coins. We will have that with central bank digital currencies. We will have that with corporations that create currencies like Libra and Facebook and various other countries. And you're going to be able to choose which ones you want to use. If you believe in the credit risk of a certain bank, then you can put your savings in that, or your spending money in that. If you believe in, these different organizations, we're going to have the choice of that in the future. With choice also comes complexity, and with complexity comes people that don't necessarily focus on their financial affairs, and therefore they outsource that decision to other people. And we innovate products in order to make these decisions easier. But these products are what disconnects people and their money. And really, what we're seeing right now is how money flows is life and death for people at the moment. How money flows, this is far too an important thing for people to not question, not look at, not ask, how did this money actually get here? Not completely outsource their financial decisions to other people because they get lost in the complexity. I understand that, sometimes we have to trust people. It's like in situations like this, we can try and research as much as we like about any operation that we're having, but at some point you have to trust that somebody knows more about it. And a lot of people do that in finance. But in today's day and age, and thanks to things like Bitcoin, people start to actually question things that they would never question before about finance, about money, about how it's created. And when they get to use Bitcoin, they get to experience what it's like to own their own money, to send their own money globally, to be able to get money. So, in times like this, we all make selfish, self-centered decisions because we have to look out for our self-interest, for our safety. So, I've been withdrawing cash from the bank just as a safety net. And the bank tells me how much I'm allowed to withdraw. That money's not mine. I'm lucky to access that money if the bank says to me today that I can access it. If I want to save somebody in a sanctioned country, the bank will tell me that I can't spend it in such a way, and I'm not allowed to do that. When the government is printing trillions and trillions to save lives, and they have to, there is no question about it in my mind. When they have to do that, and we know the effect that that has on our savings and the consequences, when we see what happens in countries like Venezuela, when they experience hyperinflation, giving people the ability to choose not to participate in that becomes life or death. And I understand that Bitcoin, to many people, is, to some people, they think it's just some Ponzi scheme or scam. To other people, they think it's a currency just for illicit activities that governments have said are not good for society. But for other people, it's actually life or death. For other people, it's just a way of speculating and trying to make money so that they can accumulate more fiat currency so that they can get out of debt and counter some of the forces of the fact that they just happen to be born in a time when they did what their parents told them to do. They took on debt. They went and took on a student loan because that's what society told them they need to do. And then throughout university, they recycled their credit cards again and again and again because that's what they had to do. And then they were told that they would get a good job, but they are in a time when markets might be crashing, or so many people got degrees that the competitiveness meant that they just couldn't get what they thought that they studied so long for. And then they drove them deeper and deeper into debt. And over time, they found themselves in a system where they had to borrow more because they couldn't quite afford to pay for their mortgage, because banks are redistributing 40% of all your money into pushing up the property markets. And maybe they came from a generation that was never going to save, that was never going to invest in stocks. They could never get the deposit together in order to get a mortgage because the price of property was, I say property, it's my English coming out, real estate, wherever you are in the world, reached a stage where you had to be almost a financial genius in order to beat what the vast majority of the world were going to experience. I didn't imagine I was going to go this deep into things. I thought I was just going to be, my usual self and go through some of these subjects, but it really is an opportunity that we have to take advantage of, where people are sat at home right now. And you've probably spent a great amount of time on something that you care about. And really all we can do is bring whatever you have been working on and thinking about in these times and really bring it to the world. Because this is not an us versus them scenario today. This is truly a global crisis. Whatever one country does is a country. I haven't even looked into this subject at all. I haven't had time. I've just been dealing with one situation after another. But I'm sure that this may even be, and probably people that know more about this subject can correct me if I'm wrong, but maybe some countries that are in war right now can't actually do that right now. They can't continue. They have to fight a war against this health crisis. I don't know. I don't know what's happening in such countries where, but we get the opportunity now to really focus on one singular goal. And I hope that we build something a lot better at the end of this, because I have no doubt in my mind that we get out of this. I have no doubt in my mind that, we do need to have governments that can coordinate what's right for everybody. And we need to take advantage of that when we come out of this at the other side, because the cold, hard reality is that pushing trillions and trillions and trillions is necessary and kills the financial system that we've all been using and operating off today. But today is a time in human history where the financial innovation that needed to fix that doesn't mean that it needs to be financially catastrophic for all of us. It doesn't mean that we need to lose what we've saved. It just means that we need to build something a lot better. It means that we need to learn from these different types of financial innovations that we're faced with today. And we are going to have more complexity at the money. I talked about in my previous video how the greenback was used in the American Civil War in order to inject money, debt-free money into the economy, rather than relying upon the debt-based system. And I think we're going to see something like that again. I think it's going to be central bank digital currencies. I've created many videos on this over the years. But I think that we're going to see that. And I think really this is a great time to try and maybe take some questions and see if we can help you unpack some of this stuff. I'm sorry if it was a bit more of a less organized than usual, but I'm speaking from the heart.
Hey, Simon. Just wanted to let you know that people have been commenting in the live chat already, and I'm pretty sure you know this, but I think it'll be good for you to know this, that people really appreciate what you're saying and all the work that you do. We normally get these kind of comments coming in, but they're really, really coming in now, and I think it's really, really important. Everything that you're saying has been supportive so far.
Thank you. So let's take some of the questions then.
Yeah, sure. Okay. So a few came through on Twitter. I'd like to just go through some of the ones in Twitter, if that's okay. Okay, so I'd like to know why the Fed or any other central bank can print money to infinity without it having an eventual disastrous effect on the economy. Why don't other countries or where economies are failing have the power to do this?
So there's two parts to that. And they can't print to infinity without having a disastrous effect on the financial system. So that is a disastrous effect on the financial system is what we're going to experience as a result of this. But as I've mentioned previously, a disaster just means a time for financial engineering and rethinking our financial system. But the reason that the Fed can do it is because the Fed has certain powers that other currencies and other central banks don't have. And that is that in the post-war eras, certain financial systems and ways of organizing global currencies were negotiated, called Bretton Woods. And there were a number of different agreements, but the end one that was decided upon was essentially a US dollar reserve. We were going through we had a gold reserve, And then that was designed to be a completely political, neutral commodity. Some countries have more gold, others have less gold. The division of gold around the world was really the best we had in terms of, rather than being focused on one geography. Bitcoin obviously came along, and that was less dependent upon whether your country actually had a gold supply that you could mine or not. And created a global opportunity, but then it's not reached anywhere near the level of distribution as it can be in the future. The US dollar reserve was negotiated, and in 1971, President Nixon, when faced with the thought of losing all of the US's gold, just came off the gold standard, and every other central bank followed. But because certain commodities were priced in dollars, like oil and gold, it gave significant power to that currency. It also gave a significant advantage. Prior to that, the pound was the most, that was 350-year almost world reserve currency, one of the anomalies, one of the longest standing ones we've ever seen. Prior to that, almost in some research, they say that every 50 years the world reserve currency would change. Others say about 27 was the average, if you take out the fact that the British pound was there for so long. The British pound was backed by the largest naval fleet, and at one point the British Empire controlled 60% of the world. The American dollar, the US dollar, is backed by the largest military force in the world, and guns, essentially. Guns and nuclear warfare. Gold is priced in dollars, oil is priced in dollars, and with those powers, power industries were created, like Wall Street and Silicon Valley, where Wall Street became the most liquid stock market in the world, and Silicon Valley became the source of funding for technology companies that have global impact that we all use on a global scale, pending governments that bar those, like countries like China or stuff like that. So the US has significant power, and it's why we're seeing a strengthening of the dollar right now, because people are looking, when they're taking their money out of stocks, they're taking their money out of things, they're looking at which currency has the most power, and the US dollar has that power. But printing trillions, and printing is a very misleading word because it implies that the government's creating that money, and the government's essentially using the central bank, which is a private institution, and lending that money by purchasing debt products and taking the Federal Reserve is lending the money to the government. The government has the full authority to print their own money, but instead they borrow it. That has a ginormous amount of interest that has to be factored into the amount of money that they have to collect in tax. And because the amount of debt that they take on is something that they can never repay, this can never be repaid. If the US government repaid their debt, we would be in the biggest deflationary spiral that would completely destroy the economy as we know it today. So let's stop pretending that the government can repay its debt. It can't. So then you reach the stage where you have a situation like we're in today, where you can, to try and solve a problem that is going to affect so many people, the only way to do that is to chuck this amount of money at it. But we don't need to do it the way that we are doing it. We can create money in different ways. We don't necessarily need to do it in the ways that we're doing it today. And that's the thing that needs to be questioned. So why can't other central banks do that? Because gold is not priced by other central banks. Oil is not priced in the currency of other central banks. Other central banks do not have the world reserve currency underpinning the system. And other central banks are not in countries that have the financial resources and military resources that the US has. And so the US dollar and the Fed, an anomaly, just like the pound and the Bank of England used to be an anomaly before 1913 when the Federal Reserve was created. And you know, because the US dollar is still, in my perspective, not financial advice, I've got to be careful what I say, but it's still the place to put your fiat in terms of fiat. But from my perspective, Bitcoin is the place to put savings that you can afford to speculate with. And that is because of its properties and the fact that unless there is a complete bug in the system, there is never going to be more than 21 million Bitcoin. I believe that people are going to want to own their own money and transact globally. And the only way you can actually do that is with a currency that's apolitical. And the fact that it also has a fixed money supply means that it's our world's best shot at achieving sound money. And I believe that it's something that central banks are going to have to add to their reserve requirements in the future, making it the definition of a world reserve currency. Whether that happens or not, central banks aren't going to want that. But I've created many different videos on my YouTube channel where I've gone through scenarios in which that can happen. And one of those videos, which I got quite a lot of pushback on, was how there could be a ginormous event in 2020 that leads to such extreme change that could happen a lot faster than we thought, where everybody was forecasting 10, 20 years. I also created a video, one of the very first videos on my YouTube channel 9 years ago, 8 years ago, whatever it was, that it was uploaded in the 20s. And that's a slightly misleading title, as uncanny as it was, because I do believe that financial engineering can be used in order to create, not the consequences that we had in the last Great Depression in the 20s, 30s. So anyway, a long answer to your question. The US dollar has powers that other central banks don't have. The Fed has powers that other central banks don't have.
All right, the next question we have from Twitter is Bitcoin safe from the authorities, or will they make transactions illegal?
The government has the full authority to make transactions illegal should they choose. That is a real likelihood that will happen as Bitcoin becomes more and more important. I think that competition will drive out such things. You've got different countries which are acting very differently. In countries like Japan, they've been spending the last decade creating good regulations for crypto exchanges, embracing it almost as a medium, almost as legal tender. And other countries have not been taking the same effect. So at one stage it was banned in China. And what we saw is record levels of peer-to-peer volume in China of people that still wanted to use Bitcoin, that still wanted to have control of their own money, that still wanted to transact globally, that still wanted sound money where the money supply couldn't be inflated or deflated away. And the level of transactions in China continued. But I also believe that there's going to be a game theoretical situation that's going to play out after this. It's not going to be, maybe not going to be this year, maybe next year. But I believe in these currency wars. Once we get this health crisis under control, the politics are going to start again. And there's going to be a struggle and a grab to try and be the next superpower. And the next superpower is always controlled by a collapse of a previous financial currency. The next superpower, every change and shift always coincides with a change and shift in currency. And I believe that smaller countries are going to want to make high risk, high return bets just in case, because the high risk, high return nature of Bitcoin as an asset class means that a small central bank that has no chance of competing in these currency wars can make an announcement that they're holding some of their reserves in Bitcoin. And as a consequence, the price of Bitcoin, I would forecast, not financial advice, would go up a lot. And then just by the nature of being incentivized to participate in the system, that type of financial gain, like we've seen and experienced in the past, where the government of Bulgaria confiscated from criminals in their country some Bitcoin, and the Bitcoin went up in price to the point where it superseded their level of national debt, is completely in the self-interest of certain central banks. And then you have some of the more superpower economies like Japan, who have been more progressive in their thinking and have been, really part of the journey of Bitcoin from the very origins of Mt. Gox, and experienced, the consequences of exchanges collapsing in the Bitcoin community. I want to make it really clear, because there's probably a lot of people watching this that may not be from the Bitcoin community. Mt. Gox collapsing has no impact on whether Bitcoin has some of its properties. That is a private exchange, just in case you didn't know, which is essentially a bank in a different form, a Bitcoin bank, as it were. Bitcoin gives you the ability to do things without that bank. It allows you to be your own bank. And I believe that some of the more progressive banks in this game of chicken, whereby the last country to hold Bitcoin as some of their reserves ends up the one that doesn't gain from the financial impact of one central bank, two central banks, three central banks deciding to use it as part of their reserve currency, and almost becoming a way for some of those opportunistic countries to overcome some of the ginormous financial burden that was given to their country as a result of this health crisis. I think that is going to create a game of chicken and currency wars. And the last country to do that, which will be the Federal Reserve, the Bank of England, the European Central Bank, the People's Bank of China, the ones that have the most amount of power now, are the ones that are the most likely to be the last to do it. And therefore, it could become one of the largest redistributions of wealth that we've seen. This is highly speculative, but what I've come to realize over the last decade, from being in a room of 20 to 40 people that believed that Bitcoin was an important invention in that first Bitcoin conference, to where we are today, I've seen that the impossible can happen. And if Bitcoin just continues to be where it is today, it's one of the most unbelievable achievements that should be in economics textbooks around the world. And it was purely created with no central bank, with no government, and really one of the purest forms of sound money that we've ever seen. It's got its problems. It's not a very good medium of exchange. It's not a very good unit of account yet. But yet, in these times, it gives people the ability to transact globally, be their own bank, and counter some of the forces of what the governments are being, this is not blame, what they have to do right now as a result of it. Yeah, so I can't even remember what the question was.
Don't worry, people love it. Okay, so the next question I have here, actually, yeah, so someone's asking about if you have any more information about helicopter money.
I think we covered helicopter money in one of the videos in this video series. I can't remember if it was either the second or the third one. But I'm really interested and intrigued to see how this actually gets executed. I've been so busy with other matters that I haven't even managed to follow the markets today. So maybe I've missed something. But from what I last saw, the US was looking at sending checks, the most antiquated form of money that they're going to create through quantitative easing. So essentially, the government, the central bank, and I literally, I haven't had time to go through the flow of funds. So I'm going to look back at this and make sure I cover this in the next one because things have just been moving too fast. But the flow of funds is that the central bank is going to put some digits on a computer and they're going to use those digits to borrow money and purchase bonds. The government's going to borrow that money. They're going to purchase bonds. And then they're going to have to repay interest on that money. And then they're going to use that money to the most antiquated form of money to every American person. My bet is that there's a much, much better way of doing it. And in the cryptocurrency industry, we call these airdrops, and airdrops can be done very fast, very easily. I understand that there's, in order to try and get the correct data and ensure that you're not giving $1,000 checks to people that don't need it. There's obviously an administrative angle to that. But that money could be created in a way where it doesn't incur interest. There's no need to do it that way. But we're moving too fast. I don't think we have the time to think through these things. I think we just got to move at the pace that we need to move at. But helicopter money is essentially depending, the important part is where the money came from. It's not coming from tax. It's not coming from someone's savings. It's not coming from printing. It's not being paid with cash. So you've got to ask the question of where that money is actually going to come from. And I think it's quantitative easing, but I need to really check the flow of funds before I say something that might not be accurate, because I haven't had time to dig into the detail yet. But you can bet, as a money geek, I will be digging into it, and I'll cover it in a future video as well.
Nice one. All right, so another question that I have from Twitter. By having a monopoly on printing money, the Fed can just buy all these companies like Boeing and basically nationalize everything. The US doesn't really produce anything, and we just consume and import everything. My question is, what's the solution to the problem?
Well, I believe that sound money and fiat money that's more transparent is my version of a solution that moves us in the right direction. With every solution you can come up with right now, there's going to be winners and losers. That's just the nature of the markets. But I believe that having politically neutral money like Bitcoin that gives people an opportunity and an exit, that has no connection to any country, that doesn't care about your sexuality, your race, your anything, is important. And then the fact that people have a choice can then be used to create different forms of fiat currencies. When you add more transparency, I'm definitely not pushing my book, and if I can figure out some way of giving my book away free, I'll give it away free. Currently, you can, I think I'm not pushing the book. It was written in 2010. It started I started on the book before Bitcoin, but the book was called Bank to the Future, Protect Your Future Before Governments Go Bust. And in that book, I talked about the different ways that you can create money. I've also given lots of free videos. This is definitely not a plug for the book. I just haven't found a good way of giving it away free yet. I'll make sure I do that. But in the book, I talked about debt-free money versus debt money. And there's a video on YouTube, if you check out my YouTube channel, 6 forms of money. And in that 6 forms of money, I deconstruct all these different types of money. And those 6 forms of money are by no means all the money. But because the way that we create money is so incredibly complex and stupid, it's very, very, very hard to follow the flow of money. I dedicated my life to it, and I'm still learning different things in trying to understand the flow of money. You have things like M0, M1, M2, M3, M4. And it's, if you simply had a fiat currency, a government created money called M, that was debt-free money, then you can have money that essentially you can fully understand the supply. You don't use crazy mechanisms for changing its supply. And then you can fully judge a government's ability to prevent inflation and deflation in a fully transparent way. In the future, it can be algorithmic. It can be the optimum supply for a country. The concept that economists have been wrestling with since economics and money has been studied. That debt-free money, because it's transparent, because you can see its supply, because announcements that can be made, because people can exit into something that operates off more sound monetary principles, then you can judge so much easier whether a government is abusing their power, or that they're given that they don't use. That essentially, many people criticize fractional reserve banking, but fractional reserve banking is a free market solution to money creation, because it's essentially the private sector. Now, I understand it's not quite free market because there's regulations involved, and securing a banking license is crony capitalism. But essentially, it's a more free market solution. Yet we criticize the fiat money system, as we should, for its incredibly unbelievable design in terms of, you just would not have designed a money system the way that money works today. You just wouldn't have. But it brought about, these really deviations where, you have organizations. The IMF has come out today saying that, let me see if I can find the quote. The IMF is saying that this is essentially going to be a worse recession than the financial crisis. I did a section in the book about the IMF and the World Bank. The IMF and the World Bank essentially, they engage in global money creation through the currency called SDRs, special drawing rights. And they essentially use the power of the US dollar in order to issue loans to countries that really want to borrow money in dollars. And the countries that tend to be the ones that want to borrow money in dollars tend to be countries that have the worst structure in the world. And so IMF and the World Bank is made out to be this institution that is there to redistribute money to the countries that need it most in the world. But they don't give it to the countries that need it. They lend it to the countries that need it in dollars. And when you take on a loan and your currency has fluctuations against the dollar loan, because their currencies can be more volatile, you end up in often crippling that country by debt. And then they add tied loans, whereby they force the loan to come and be collateralized by their essential infrastructure in that country. And essentially using the power of the dollar, and the IMF and the World Bank essentially get to purchase through these debt products that they created as debt, the infrastructure of countries, and essentially dictate and interfere into their politics, using dollar loans as the tool in order to do that. And then it comes with consequences like, you must allow us to have a military base in that country, whereby US has military bases in pretty much most countries in the world. And really it's all because they were given the power of the negotiations that came from the post-World War era. That's why I'm forecasting currency wars, because there's so much to gain from having your currency be the global currency. But I think society needs world reserve currencies to be things that are not connected with one country, because they will be abused. And it's a natural phenomenon that will repeat itself time and time again. And yet, when else but today could we have such an opportunity?
Okay.
How are we doing for time, Famida?
I feel like we've gone over an hour. Yeah, an hour. And
okay.
How many more minutes? How much more time do you reckon you want to go?
Yeah, I think we should try and wrap up in the next 5 to 10 minutes and take maybe one or two questions. But I guess I'll try and do a short answer if I've ever given one. But we'll do more AMAs. You know, I'm going to make sure amongst all the situations that we're dealing with right now, I'm going to make sure that I make more of these broadcasts. So we'll catch your questions.
Okay, great. All right, so I'm just going to have a look through the questions that we've had come through on our YouTube chat. Benjamin MT asks, are we going to witness an attack on Bitcoin and cryptocurrency?
It would be completely ignorant to think that governments around the world are just going to let this thing called Bitcoin come along and give so much economic prosperity and choice to those without wanting to attack. It's a miracle that we got this far. But what happened with Bitcoin is it was completely ridiculed and ignored by any power play in the beginning. Anyone that talked about Bitcoin, you know, shout out to everyone that's been a part of the Bitcoin community. And I know over the years we've had our crazy disputes, arguments, trolling, ridicule, debates. It's one of the things that I hate most and love most about the Bitcoin community, because it keeps everyone accountable. But at times I do miss what it was like in the early days when it was us versus the banks, rather than my crypto versus your crypto. Us versus the banks was a really unprecedented time in terms of progress, because that was when we were least likely to succeed. And I guess it's a part of maturity that as you get more adoption, more and more self-interest come along, and that's a part of the growth curve, and it should be embraced. People come to join the party, more and more people try and influence their perspective on Bitcoin. But I hope that one thing that can come from this is that Bitcoin is far too important to let any of those trivialities and pettiness get in the way of progressing this technology. And I know we're going to disagree of what the definition of progress is and what technical changes we want to make. But I do want to shout out to everybody that has been involved in getting Bitcoin to where it is today. And there are so many people that are attacked, ridiculed, ostracized for their different views and the different ways that the different groups that have congregated around Bitcoin. But I hope we can get to the point where we still realize that this is far more important than us. This is far more important than any one self-interest, and Bitcoin has been designed and engineered and works in a way where those self-interests have never been able to take absolute control over the system. We may have pockets of centralization. There may be too much mining in one geographical area. There may be a few developers that have more say than other developers. There may be users that have more followers and influence than others. There may be businesses that have access to resources and have grown and have more influence than other businesses. But all of those power plays work in conflict with each other and have created this beautiful innovation whereby none of those have absolute control over the system. And that's something that I think is very hard to replicate, and I'm not sure that we're going to see again. And so I think we need to respect it and appreciate it for what it is and what it can do. And I've again forgotten the question I was answering.
Oh, sorry. The question was, are we going to witness an attack on
Yes.
Bitcoin and cryptocurrency?
We absolutely will. There will be interests that really don't want this to succeed. It's a miracle we got this far. But the thing that's kept it alive is competition, country competition all the way. When China banned it, all of the business went to Korea and Japan. When the US got very aggressive, other countries started to see it as an opportunity. When any country has tried to attack this thing, you see other countries that see this as a mountain of opportunity to create jobs in times of and you know that competition. But I believe because these countries are going to be engaging in currency wars, I believe that it's more likely that Bitcoin will become a tool for those countries to use in those currency wars. And the beauty is that although people can use it, anyone can use it. A central bank can use it, you can use it, a government can use it, anybody can use it because it's politically neutral. It's neutral, it's code, it's maths and code. Because of that, I think that it will be used. And if one country tries to make it illegal in order to pursue another agenda, I think other countries will look to create that game theoretical scenario and power play. But you know, so it would be very ignorant to not think that there's very important powers that have very little interest in this succeeding. And that's that. Now I remember where we were. They ridiculed it. They laughed at it. Then they tried to take control of it by calling it a blockchain and taking out the word Bitcoin. And now they're looking to rebuild their financial system, and banks are embracing it right now. And the great thing is that, as opposed to fiat money, is you don't need a bank for it to exist. With fiat money, you need the bank for it to exist under our existing system. With Bitcoin, you don't need a bank, but banks can come along and play with us if they choose, and they will choose. And yes, governments will try and attack it. But what we've seen is that creates an opportunity for another country, and especially in an environment where there's currency wars that I think we're going to experience after we get past this health crisis. So I think that's all the time we got. I really appreciate some of these questions. You know, you've seen probably a side of me and an emotion that comes out to me that you don't normally see in my broadcast. But that's because I believe that these are truly unique times. And my plea to everybody is just really stay safe. You know, think about your safety, the safety of the people you care about, the safety of the people. Make smart decisions. Don't worry about what people think about you. When I first, went out wearing a mask, we were the only ones on this island that were wearing a mask, and some people were offended by it. They said that's ridiculous. But now we're seeing more and more people do that. And what we need is effective leadership in these times. And it doesn't mean that you need to be, doing amazingly big leadership on a grand scale. Leadership comes in your little environment, your family, the people around you, your community. People are going to need leadership. And, it's a time for you to really step up. And maybe you don't want to take the leadership role, but maybe you want to take a supporting function, as we're seeing around the world, just incredible acts of kindness all around the world of people that are, playing their supporting function or their leadership function or whatever they are. But we all need to step up, and we all need to look at what we can do and bring that to the world, because this is a truly unique time. And let's use this opportunity to just create something vastly better than we've had in the past. And that's what I'm going to dedicate my time to. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for your time. Thank you, Famida, for bringing those questions out. And I'll see you in the next AMA. And if you did like this message, then do me a favor, retweet it if it's going to help someone. I understand some finance is going to be the last thing that some people want to think about right now. But that some people are going to be in a position where they really need to start thinking about these things. And so please do help me retweet, share. I'd really appreciate that. Thanks, everybody. Stay safe.